Imagine standing at the threshold of death, not with fear, but with serenity. The ancient alchemists did not dread this moment. They welcomed it. For them, death was not darkness, but transition, a sacred gate into a subtler realm. The fear we hold is rooted in forgetting that we are more than flesh, more than thought, more than the passing flicker of identity. The alchemists remembered. In secret temples and candlelit chambers, they studied not just metals, but the soul itself. They observed nature's patterns, decay, rebirth, dissolution, return, and they saw in these rhythms the blueprint of the soul's own journey. Where others saw an end, the alchemists saw a beginning. Death, to them, was not to be avoided but prepared for, not feared but mastered. For how could one transmute lead into gold without first transmuting the self? They believed the body was merely the crucible, and when it cracked, the essence it held would be released, not lost, but transformed. To understand why the alchemists saw death differently, we must enter their worldview, a cosmos not ruled by chance, but by sacred laws. Chief among these was the law of transmutation, that nothing truly dies, it only changes form. Fire does not destroy wood, it liberates its essence as smoke, ash, and warmth. In the same way, the soul, they believed, was never extinguished, only refined. Alchemy was never merely chemical, it was spiritual physics. The furnace was both literal and symbolic. It mirrored the inner fire through which the ego was burned away and the true self revealed. Death, then, was the final distillation, not the end of life, but the boiling off of illusion. What remained was consciousness, purified and rejoined with the all. To the profane, this sounds poetic. To the initiate, it is practical truth. This is why ancient alchemists wrote in riddles. Only those who had died before dying could understand. For them, mortality was not a threat. It was the veil. And every veil once lifted reveals light. The alchemists did not obsess over the afterlife as a place of reward or punishment. That was the language of religion, not of the great work. For them, the afterlife was a continuation of the same alchemical process, a refining fire beyond the body. They saw the soul as a metal to be purified through many lives, many deaths, many fires. Reincarnation was not a doctrine to be believed, but a law to be experienced. Death was not exile, it was return. And birth, not a beginning, but a remembering. What dies is always what is not essential. The ego, the name, the roles we play. The soul sheds them like a snake sheds its skin. What remains is what was always there, silent, unshaken, eternal. The alchemists called this the inner gold, not literal metal, but the immortal spark hidden beneath identity. Their fearlessness came not from denial, but from knowledge. They knew that what truly is cannot end, and so they walked toward death as others walk toward sleep, not with despair, but with sacred readiness. If you're drawn to the kind of wisdom that challenges fear and rewrites reality, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell. There's much more to uncover. To die before dying, this was the true initiation. The alchemist did not wait for the body to fail to confront impermanence. Through inner work, he rehearsed death daily. Every meditation was a symbolic descent, every renunciation a small funeral. He stripped away layers of attachment, of self-importance, of illusion, until only the essential remained. This was not morbid, it was liberation. For what is fear but resistance to change? And what is alchemy but the art of change itself? The initiate learned to welcome loss, not because it was pleasant, but because it was honest. He understood that to cling was to suffer, and to let go was to see. Death was the master teacher, not a thief, but a revealer. It exposed what was false and polished what was true. The alchemist did not chase immortality of the flesh. He sought the immortality of awareness, not to live forever, but to die consciously, with clarity, presence, and grace. That was the real transmutation, turning fear into freedom. In ancient texts, alchemists describe death not as a fall, but as a phase, the nigredo, the blackening. the necessary first stage in the magnum opus. Just as lead must darken before it shines, the soul too must pass through shadow. The Negredo was not evil. It was honesty. It was the stripping away of false light, false identity, false permanence. This was the dark night of the soul, the moment when the illusions no longer hold. It is painful, yes, but pain for the alchemist was not punishment. It was purification. Fire never asks permission. It burns what must be burned, and from its ash, something clearer emerges. This is why the alchemists were not afraid. They saw the descent as sacred, not failure, but alchemical necessity. To avoid darkness was to delay transformation, and so they descended willingly, even joyfully, not because they desired suffering, but because they knew only what dies can be reborn, and only through the blackening does the gold begin to glow. There is a moment deep in the alchemical path when the fear of death dissolves completely, not because the unknown becomes known, but because the illusion of separateness fades. The alchemist sees that he was never a drop apart from the ocean, only momentarily unaware. Death, then, is not the end of the self, but the return of self to source, a merging, not an erasure. In this realization, mourning transforms. Grief softens into gratitude. The passing of a loved one becomes not a vanishing, but a transition, like steam rising from water. Something shifts, not disappears. Alchemists wrote of this with symbols, serpents eating their own tail, phoenixes reborn in flame. These were not fantasies. They were maps of consciousness, signs that death is woven into life, and life into death, in a circle unbroken. Once this is seen, the question is no longer how to escape death, but how to meet it awake, with eyes open and spirit steady. In their deepest writings, the alchemists spoke of a second birth, not of the body, but of the soul. This rebirth did not require death in the literal sense, but it required the surrender of identity. To become gold, the metal must first cease to be lead, and so it is with the self. The stories we tell about who we are, what we fear, what we desire, these must be burned away, not denied, but seen through. The alchemist becomes a silent witness to his own dissolution. He watches as the layers fall, beliefs, attachments, names, and what remains is not a blankness, but a brightness, not a void, but awareness. This rebirth is not granted, it is earned, through inner fire, through death in life. The one who emerges is not the same as the one who began. Something quieter, clearer, more whole takes its place. This is why the true alchemist does not fear death. He has already passed through it again and again. Within, death is no longer a door, it is a mirror. And so the alchemist returns, not from death, but from illusion. He walks among others, yet he is no longer bound by the same fears. Where once he clung to permanence, now he embraces flow. Where once he resisted loss, now he sees its gift. The great secret was never about avoiding death, but about understanding it. Death is not the enemy. Forgetfulness is. When we forget who we truly are, we fear what we never understood. But when we remember, when we see that we are not the body, not the name, not the story, death becomes a chapter, not the end. The ancient alchemists knew this, that true immortality was not in flesh, but in consciousness, that gold was not dug from the earth, but awakened within. They did not chase eternal life, they practiced eternal awareness. And in doing so, they mastered the only art that matters, how to live with depth and how to die without fear. If death isn't the end, then who or what are you becoming?